On the afternoon of October 4th, 1975, a 26-year-old Ric Flair, who had been finding his feet in the wrestling territories of the mid-70s, boards a Cessna 310 in his hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. In his company are multiple other talents: Johnny Valentine, Bob Bruggers, Tim Woods, and David Crockett, being flown to a wrestling show in Wilmington by a 28-year-old Vietnam veteran pilot, Joseph Michael Farkas. This was during the early days of Flair's iconic feud with Wahoo McDaniel, with Flair having recently attacked Wahoo with a table leg as a heel. This heat, as well as the other matches on the show, had sold out the outdoor Legion Stadium. It was pretty much just another day for Flair as he geared up to go against Wahoo McDaniel again. He wasn't sat in his preferred seat next to the pilot, allowing US heavyweight champion and top star from Jim Crockett Promotions, Johnny Valentine, to take that seat. What would follow would be equal parts tragic and terrifying, as the plane would eventually crash, badly injuring everybody on board and resulting in the loss of the life of Farkas the pilot. Wahoo McDaniel, interestingly, was supposed to be aboard the plane, but in a decision that may have saved his life, decided to drive to the venue instead. Johnny Valentine was scheduled to face the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Dory Funk Jr., at the Greensboro Coliseum the next week. Unfortunately, due to the following events, that match would never take place. According to Ric Flair, the aircraft was grossly over the weight limit by around 1,400 pounds, with the average wrestler on board weighing around 240 pounds. Farkas had struggled to get the plane off the ground initially, electing to dump the fuel from the backup tank to free up some more weight. He didn't think this would be a problem, as the flight itself was only supposed to be around 45 minutes. Fighting these odds and flying against a strong headwind due to flying so near to the coast, the boys took off and began to increase altitude. They made it to 6,000 feet, and the second engine of the plane stopped working. It's hard to piece together a timeline of these events, as those who were present seem to have blocked out the memory to a certain degree, with Flair unable to recall much of the flight. Whether we can attribute this amnesia to how long ago the incident was, whether the wrestlers had a few cocktails before going on board, head injury, or the traumatic nature of the incident is up in the air, unlike the plane. But when the plane was descending and was already cleared for a visual approach in Wilmington, Johnny Valentine had turned around and said to the boys, quote,
"Guess what? We're out of fuel."
Apparently Johnny was laughing and not worried about the lack of fuel, knowing that the plane could run on its second engine that was still running. The pilot, Farkas, would reach for the fuel tank selection lever and attempt to defer to the reserve fuel tank, only to unfortunately discover it was completely empty. Farkas turned the lever, the engine sputtered out and died. Immediately realizing the implications of this, Farkas began to scream, with Johnny Valentine allegedly slapping him to snap him out of it and bring him to. But there was nothing that could be done. The aircraft suddenly dropped, with only 3 miles to go until it was supposed to land. David Crockett would recall remembering the engine was starting to go, and with his mind on his 2-week-old son, who he would never see again if he didn't survive this. David decided to practice the Lamaze breathing technique that's used by mothers to help them cope with the pain of childbirth. The reason David did this was that he was determined to not get knocked out or pass out. He was also aware that with all the wrestlers in front of him, that if they were to crash in water, he would never get out. And just like that, a light went out, and David doesn't recall anything else from the crash. Tim Woods, however, would claim, quote,
"We just dropped like a rock."
Tim Woods was the original Mr. Wrestling and had previously had a conversation with another plane crash survivor, Austin Idol. Austin Idol is a legend for those who are a bit younger and may not know. During Austin's plane crash, he had been wearing no shoes and suffered injuries to his feet that nearly meant he couldn't wrestle again. And as Tim Woods and his friends plummeted towards the earth, Tim realized he himself had not taken Austin's advice and was wearing no shoes. In an act of desperation, he slammed an airplane manual under his feet. Despite all the chaos, Woods reports being confident that they weren't going to die, but knew they were all going to get badly hurt. Johnny Valentine, however, disagreed and was claiming that he was not going to be hurt. According to Valentine's wife, Johnny thought he was indestructible and was telling everyone that they were going to be all right. Whether he sincerely believed this, or he was just trying to keep everybody calm, is up for debate. But I think it was the latter, as he had already slapped the pilot out of a panic. Farkas attempted to level the plane as it went down, using the controls to level the plane at around 4,000 feet. Unfortunately, the plane would clip and tear through tree branches on the way down, with David Crockett claiming that the pilot almost managed to land the plane, and had they not hit the trees, they would have made it to the runway relatively safely. This wasn't to be, however, and when they hit the ground, Farkas would stall the plane to slow the speed down as quickly as possible, with the plane still moving at 90 miles per hour when it hit the ground. On impact, the seats would shake loose. Since Johnny Valentine was at the front of the plane, he took the full brunt of the impact, with loose seats, wrestlers and luggage flying towards him and breaking his back. Johnny Valentine would never wrestle again. David Crockett's head smashed through the seat in front of him and busted Tim Wood's ribs. Ric Flair was only 26 years old and would himself suffer a broken back along with multiple lacerations. And Bob Bruggers, who was also on the plane, broke his back. The plane had hit tree after tree and just missed a water tower before crashing into a railroad embankment about 100 yards short of the runway. Many of the men don't remember being pulled out of the wreck, with those who do remember saying to the ones who don't, "Be glad you don't remember." Flair vaguely recalls hearing one of the paramedics say, "I think we're going to lose this one," and for a brief moment thought the medics were referring to Flair himself. They weren't. They were referring to the pilot, Joseph Michael Farkas. All the boys were rushed to New Hanover County Hospital as quickly as possible. Farkas would remain unresponsive in a coma for 2 months before passing away in the hospital. Bob Bruggers had a steel rod inserted in his spinal column. He spent 1 month in the hospital before going home. There are many who believe that Bruggers could have returned to wrestling, but he also would never wrestle again. David Crockett would feel the effects of the plane crash for 6 months after it happened. He had suffered head trauma as well as other injuries. Tim Woods was stitched up in the mouth and had dislocated his shoulder. The injuries to his mouth had made him unable to eat or drink anything due to the pain until a dentist examined his mouth and revealed he'd shattered 2 teeth and the nerves sat there exposed. Johnny Valentine's paralysis very much hurt the business, as Valentine was being geared up to be the top babyface in the promotion. If Flair had been in that seat, perhaps Flair himself would have been paralyzed from the waist down like Johnny was. They used Tim Woods in the newspaper reports to disguise the fact that he'd been in an airplane with his enemy Johnny Valentine, as even in moments of great tragedy it was important to protect kayfabe. Kayfabe was in fact so protected that when Wahoo McDaniel would go visit the boys in hospital, the hospital staff phoned the police for fear that Wahoo was there to attack Flair as revenge for the angle that had taken place on television not long prior. The show in Wilmington would regardless still take place. Fans who were in attendance claimed that the announcers kept kayfabe, announcing the plane crash and that Ric Flair and Johnny Valentine had been injured. But they claimed that Tim Woods was missing unrelated to the crash, and Wahoo McDaniel would run down the revised card for the fans. With some wrestlers pulling double duty, and there being a battle royal in the main event, they managed to save the card, offering sincerely that people could ask for their money back and go home, but apparently no one in the audience did. So that's a brief summary of the event itself. Now let's talk about Flair. See, despite his back being broken at age 26, Ric Flair would go on to become one of, if not the greatest, wrestler of all time. He had been told by doctors that he would never wrestle again, but because Flair's veins flow full of piss and vinegar, he didn't take that lying down. Flair would drop from his previous super heavyweight size of around 250 pounds down to around 180 pounds. He trained like a madman during this time, as his drop in weight and multiple injuries had led to a lack of confidence in the ring. Must have been terrifying. If you're coming back from a broken back, you'd be under the assumption that the next bump you take could accidentally paralyze you. But Flair was resilient and built different. Flair would credit promoter George Scott for his help during this time, as they decided that upon Flair's return, he should adopt the Nature Boy moniker as made famous by Buddy Rogers. The Nature Boy name being far more fitting to Flair's new, more slender look, and his more technical and heelish approach to in-ring competition. This change would lead to the Nature Boy versus Nature Boy feud, which I have previously covered in a very popular documentary on this channel. I recommend you watch both of these videos if you're a Ric Flair fan. Honestly, some of my finest work, if I do say so myself. So that's the story, a tragic one, And maybe some of you are in a little bit less of a good mood after seeing this video. So, yeah, be sure to check out my other, more light-hearted takes on wrestling history. Thanks for watching another Sarcastic Mark upload. If you can like, comment, and subscribe, I'd appreciate it very much because I'm a small channel, so it genuinely makes a big difference. See you in the next one.